Assalamu alaikum. Today I am going to share with you my third paper, Comparative World Literature and the Problematic of Translation. I presented this paper in CCLA Conference at British Columbia University. So I thought why not to share the PowerPoint slide presentation with you. My paper addresses the paradox of the marginalized position of translation, despite serving as a theoretical fulcrum for comparative and world literatures since their birth. The scholars from comparative world literature and translation studies have come up with very different and contradictory answers to the question of translation. While some valorize it as a creative or reading practice, others undermine it due to the linguistic complexities that challenge the fidelity of the translation with the source text. Despite differences, they agree on one point that literary history is written from national perspective and fails to account for the trajectory of a translated work in different cultures and times. This paper will use selected articles of Susan Besnett from the discipline of translation studies as the theoretical framework to address the problematic of translation as well as to propose a literary history written from a translational perspective as a bridge to ford the rifts between comparative and world literatures. The paper will use dialectical approach to study the problematic of translation, starting with Apter's thesis of untranslatability, juxtaposing it with Walkowitz's antithesis of born translated works to finally postulate a synthesis of comparative and world literatures with translation studies. So the literature review includes the works of Emily Apter and Walkowitz. Emily Apter's main argument targets the lack in the contemporary approaches to world literature because of their reliance on translatability assumption and their inability to accommodate untranslatability appropriately into literary heuristic. She postulates untranslatability as a theoretical fulcrum of comparative literature with bearing on approaches to world literatures. It seems as if she is making an attempt to restore world literature to comparative literature's earlier resistance or even antagonism to translated works with an emphasis on the original text. The approach she proposes is not new, as the comparative literature has had always acknowledged the worth of non-translation, mistranslation, incompatibility, and untranslatability. Nicholas Harrison vehemently supports Apter's take on untranslatability, which he interprets as the loss in translation, making a case for learning foreign languages as a prerequisite to take world literature. Later, he acknowledges the limitation of his own argument that learning even a single foreign language requires a great investment of effort and time. Apter puts the discipline of world literature in reverse gear, ironically, when the academia has already taken the translational turn. This non translational turn raises many questions, especially when she refutes her title and argument with the counterclaim that she is neither against world literature nor is she against translation or the possibility of translation. At the same time, she recognizes the interdisciplinary and transnational space shared by comparative world literatures and translation studies. So, what is the contention? She maintains that world literature and translation studies should or could revise literary histories by redrafting the map of geopolitics that blindly follows Eurochronology. Her demand is timely, as we will later see by synthesizing her argument with that of Walkowitz and Susan Bassnett, urging for rewriting literary history. But what she overlooks in the process is the role of translation in the recent deprovincialization of Eurocentric disciplines of comparative world literatures by including many non-European works, as Walkowitz would argue. Translation still remains the only window for the users of the major or global languages on the literatures in minor languages. Apter defines untranslatables differently in the course of her essay. For example, she points out the linguist barriers to translate glossolalia, homonymies, and amphiboles, etc. Later, she makes them culturally and nationally specific references that cannot be translated, thus implying the difficulty of cultural translation. Walkowitz, analyzing Apter's notion of untranslatability associated with the creative failures, compares it with Barbara Cassin's use of the term associated with not translating still. Cassin's definition also shares Apter's translation dysphoria, for translation becomes an interminable process not to be accomplished. Walkowitz reveals the political underpinning of the project by linking it to the pressure of global literary market in the United States to halt the absorption of many literatures into a supersized English language curriculum. For Walkowitz, the untranslatables are the particularist works bound by a region to resist translation. In contrast to Apter's thesis of untranslatability, can be studied Walkowitz's antithesis of born-translated works. The very first sentence of her introduction, "There is nothing easier and nothing more contemporary than translation," sounds as an antonym to the difficulties of translation as propounded by Emily Apter. If a human translator is confronted with the dilemma of linguistic pluralism, what can be said about the machine or Google Translator? Technology has made access to a literary work in the target language just one click away. The circulation and production of works has acquired an unprecedented speed, and any reader or technology user can access the translation of any work. Susan Bassnett, in her article, agrees on the need of a new perspective on translation, especially in comparative literature. This perspective should recognize the role of technology or non-human objects in the process, so that field should not view research into literature and culture as separate from research into translation and technology. These shifts are similar to the shifts that Victorian society witnessed as a result of printing press and photography. Can this technological mediation challenge or critique the global literary capitalism, the politics of publishers or translation affecting the circulation and production of the works is not answered by Walkowitz. Her emphasis on the inevitability of the translation process that cannot be stopped despite its difficulties and complexities. Technology has begun a new era of the works that are born translated, following in the footsteps of the born digital. Walkowitz brings translation from the periphery to the center of the world literary system, controlling the circulation and production of works and their position in world literature. Like Apter and Casanova, she also recognizes the politics of translation. In her notes to introduction, she cites Casanova to suggest translation as an index of dominance, a deciding factor in the ranking of world literature, to an extent that decline in the translation of French literature indicates decline of French literature or nation. Translation becomes the medium and origin of born translated works. She postulates that born translated novels approach this system opportunistically to get an entry into global market, prize race, and academic list. Dominant languages like English and French are used as medium of translation. Also, many diasporic and post-colonial writers choose to write in these languages to assess wider global readership. This preemptive translation practice has been a common phenomena of past and the present literary world. This re-establishes the hegemony of recent global language English as a medium of translation, as Kathleen Shield notes. Word languages such as Arabic, Hindi, French, German, Chinese, and Russian are all yielding to English in the hierarchy of translations. The solution Apter offers is to synthesize linguistic pluralism inherent in translation with the practice of word literature to take full account of linguistic constraints and truth conditions in the process. This incommensurability of untranslatability is the basic characteristic of translation or translatability, as is evident in the phrase linguistic pluralism inherent in translation. The examples of Badiou and Cassin bring forth the plasticity of translation both as a theory and as a practice. David M. Roche also acknowledges that a work in the process of getting translated undergoes transformation by the host culture's national tradition. Proponents of translation like Sandra Berman also postulates that everything cannot be transferred to target language, and translation serves as a work in process, a work of ongoing imperfection, and goes as far as to say that a perfect translation or true copy would lose or gain nothing. So, in the literature review, we can sum up that both Apter and Walkowitz highlight the lack in the literary history. They demand to rewrite literary history from translational perspective is more practical and manageable proposal, as we shall see in our discussion of Susan Bassnett, that translation studies is also looking forward to it. Apter is right to highlight the Eurocentrism of literary history that uses ready-made typologies like classicism, realism, etc. to study word literature. She also argues that Western philosophy is the product of Greek philosophy and its history is history of translation, and concludes the philosophization of word remains a fundamental problem demanding the re-philosophization of literary history through the history of translation. Walkowitz also postulates translation is the engine rather than caboose of literary history. Translation's central role as spur, problem, and opportunity to solve the problem can be realized by a new literary history with the power to transform the Anglophone literature through discovering the way dominant languages and literatures are indebted to other languages and literatures. Now let's see, what does Bassnett offer? She offers an interdisciplinary approach. Susan Bassnett postulates a more interdisciplinary approach with her conviction that breakdown in the divisions between theory, practice, and pedagogy can benefit different fields by bringing researchers, teachers, and translators to work in collaboration. Historically speaking, translation has evolved from the point of emphasis on literal translation, cultural translation, to creative translation with an increased visibility, significance of the role of translator. The importance of translators' role increased the value of studying translated works in both comparative and word literatures. Citing Doris Bachman-Medick's use of term translational turn to suggest that humanities has become translational, Bassnett argues that the most important solution to the problematic of translation is the dialogic relationship with disciplines like literary, linguistic, and cultural studies. Sandra Berman, in her article, situates comparative word literature and translation studies in and zone dialogic space to realize the dream of a more translational and transnational humanities. Bassnett acknowledges that anti-translation prejudices date back to the birth of translation studies as a discipline in 1970s and still persist in academia. She expresses her concern over the discipline's failure to challenge orthodoxies perpetuated by research in word literature, post-colonial, and cultural studies. She mentions Emily Apter, Cesar Dominguez, and David Damrosch, to name a few, as the writers engaging with translation from different perspectives, though not always very aware of translation studies' publications. Historically speaking, translation's role, though consistent part of comparative literature, has been the suppressed and the unacknowledged. In the 1990s, comparative literature did open itself to translation, but with the continuous stress on learning languages to assess the original text. This gap needs to be filled between the disciplines that share transnational and translational space with the list full of translated works. Bessner stresses the need to bring translation studies in the center to respond to the anxieties of monolingual literary theorists. By sharing research in translation studies with other colleagues and by engaging in interdisciplinary collaborative projects. BASNet requires other disciplines to accept the plasticity of translation, making a room for variety of translations. She responds to the concern of comparative and world literature scholars for cultural translation by quoting Harish Teridevi, who blames this notion for monolingualism that ignores the realities of interlingual transfer processes. Translations are creative writings or interpretations of the text, but so are the new editions that also alter the original meaning. Different forms of translation include and are not limited to readings by different readers in time and space. Changes resulting from different editions, copies, reprints, and commentaries. Homer, Shakespeare, Sophocles, etc., can still be enjoyed, but the demise of the original text is acknowledged. The need is to initiate a collaborative, to initiate more collaborative courses and programs in translation. So to conclude, translation's plasticity as a theory and practice enables it to respond to the changing need of the related disciplines. It is ready to cope with the changes brought about by technology. Translation studies and comparative and world literature have an ethical dimension too. Their openness to other, they are in dialogue with other cultures. All that is needed is a new cultural history that would record the translational turn of 21st century as a period of translation resulting from global struggle between print culture and media technology. Bassnett shares Apter's and Walkowicz's demand in stressing the importance of rewriting literary history to account for the significant role played by translation in the development of different literatures. This new history can accommodate born translated works, the stories of untranslatability, mistranslations, and non-translations, their journey in space and time, their rise and fall in importance, translation's role in circulation and production. I hope that you enjoyed this paper. And if anyone of you wants a full the access to the full paper, can contact me or say so in the comment with their email address. I will definitely respond and share the paper with them. Thank you very much.